All right.
All right.
Concerning hobbits, go.
Well, let me find it first. There's also like 5,000 prologues, but I found it. Concerning hobbits. This book is largely concerned with hobbits, and from its pages a reader may discover much of their character and a little of their history. Further information will also be found in the selection from the Red Book of Westmarch that has already been published under the title of The Hobbit. That story was derived from the earlier chapters of the Red Book, composed by Bilbo himself, the first hobbit to become famous in the world at large, and called by him there and back again, since they told of his journey into the East and his return, an adventure which later involved all the hobbits in the great events of that age that are here related. Many, however, may wish to know more about this remarkable people from the outset, while some may not possess the earlier book. For such readers, a few notes on the more important points are here collected from Hobbit lore, and the first adventure is briefly recalled. Hobbits are an unobtrusive but very ancient people, more numerous formerly than they are today, for they love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. A well-ordered and well-farmed countryside was their favorite haunt. They do not and did not understand or like machines more complicated than a forge bellows, a watermill, or a hand loom, though they were skillful with tools. Even in ancient days they were, as a rule, shy of the big folk, as they call us, and now they avoid us with dismay and are becoming hard to find. They are quick of hearing and sharp-eyed, and though they are inclined to be fat and do not hurry unnecessarily, they are nonetheless nimble and deft in their movements. They possessed from the first the art of disappearing swiftly and silently, when large folk whom they do not wish to meet come blundering by, and this art they have developed until to men it may seem magical. But hobbits have never, in fact, studied magic of any kind, and their elusiveness is due solely to a professional skill that heredity and practice and close friendship with the earth have rendered inimitable by bigger and clumsier races. For they are a little people, smaller than dwarves, less stout and stocky, that is, even when not actually much shorter. Their height is variable, ranging between 2 and 4 feet of our measure. They seldom now reach 3 feet, but they have dwindled, they say, and in ancient days they were taller. According to the Red Book, Bandobras took (Bullroarer), son of Isengrim II, was 4'5" and able to ride a horse. He was surpassed in all Hobbit records only by 2 famous characters of old, but that curious matter is dealt with in this book. As for the hobbits of the Shire, with whom these tales are concerned, in the days of their peace and prosperity they were a merry folk. They dressed in bright colors, being notably fond of yellow and green, but they seldom wore shoes, since their feet had tough leathery soles and were clad in a thick curling hair, much like the hair of their heads, which was commonly brown. Thus the only craft little practice among them was shoemaking, but they had long and skilful fingers, and could make many other useful and comely things. Their faces were, as a rule, good-natured rather than beautiful, broad, bright-eyed, red-cheeked, with mouths apt to laughter and to eating and drinking. And laugh they did, and eat, and drink, often and heartily, being fond of simple jests at all times, and of 6 meals a day when they could get them. Mood. They were hospitable, and delighted in parties and in presents, which they gave away freely and eagerly accepted. It is plain indeed that in spite of later estrangement, hobbits are relatives of ours, far nearer to us than elves, or even than dwarves. Of old they spoke the languages of men after their own fashion, and liked and disliked much the same things as men did. But what exactly our relationship is can no longer be discovered. The beginning of hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. Hey, does the Silmarillion include anything about the origin of hobbits?
Never mentions them once. Not once. I have a theory. Have I shared with you my theory?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Lord of the Rings talks extensively about the Entwives vanishing. And I think the Entwives went to the Shire when it was uninhabited. And then when they got lonely, Iluvatar created Entings for them, but they didn't look like trees. They looked like children. Can't grow beards, run around barefoot, love good tilled earth, which is a very Entwife thing. Like, because the Ents were into forests and the Entwives were into gardens.
Interesting.
I think Iluvatar created the hobbits so that the Entwives would be happy. And that's why, like, here in the first chapter, Sam talks about his cousin seeing a walking tree on the North Moors. That's one of the Entwives.
You've connected the dots. All right, I'll accept that as headcanon. Why not?
Right. There's a lot of other things about the Hobbits that are very childish, like, they're sort of permanently the children of the garden.
Mm-hmm. No, I see that for sure. And like the dislike of like machines and industrialization and stuff like that.
And the fact that they've been protected for all these centuries by the people around them, prevented from having to face harsh realities.
Hmm. Interesting. That would also explain why they have resistance to the ring.
Yes,
Because the Ents aren't interested in it either.
exactly. That's but it's just a headcanon.
I like it. I'm taking it.
Okay.
All right.
I'm gonna finish chewing.
Back to it. Only the elves still preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Let me mute my... see if that does it. Any hoodle. Hello. Sorry about that. Where was I? Oh yes. Appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. That's the Silmarillion right there.
Yep.
All right. Yet it is clear that hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk became aware of them. Entwives.
You can keep going, I'll be right back.
Okay. And the world being after, all full of strange creatures beyond count, these little people seemed of very little importance. But in the days of Bilbo and of Frodo his heir, they suddenly became, by no wish of their own, both important and renowned, and troubled the counsels of the wise and the great. That's wise with a capital W and great with a capital G. Just so those days, the third age of Middle-earth, are now long past, and the shape of all lands has been changed. But the regions in which hobbits then lived were doubtless the same as those in which they still linger, the northwest of the Old World, east of the sea. Of their original home, the hobbits in Bilbo's time preserved no knowledge. A love of learning, other than genealogical lore, was far from general among them, but there remained still a few in the older families who studied their own books, and even gathered reports of old times and distant lands from elves and men. Their own records began only after the settlement of the Shire.
The children are having an issue, and Abby, there's toys there. Can you play with something quietly? Like the dinosaurs? Sorry, everybody.
I'm going to take a sip of tea whilst you are...
This is something I would like to do. What is Adam?
Where were we at?
I will find our place.
Thank you.
All right. Cool. Where were we? Oh yes, and they gathered reports of old times and distant lands from elves, dwarves, and men. Their own records began only after the settlement of the Shire. This is confirming your headcanon. And their most ancient legends in their wandering days. It is clear nonetheless from these legends and from the evidence of their peculiar words and customs that, like many other folks, hobbits had, in the distant past, moved westward. Their earliest tales seem to glimpse a time when they dwelt in the upper vales of Anduin, beyond the eaves of Greenwood the Great and the Misty Mountains. Between the eaves of Greenwood the Great and the Misty Mountains. Why they later undertook the hard and perilous crossing of the mountains into Eriador is no longer certain. Their own accounts speak of the multiplying of men in the land and of a shadow that fell on the forest, so that it became dark, and its new name was Mirkwood. Before the crossing of the mountains, the hobbits had already become divided into three somewhat different breeds: Harfoots, Stoors, and Foulhides. The Harfoots were browner of skin, smaller and shorter, and they were beardless and bootless. Their hands and feet were neat and nimble, and they preferred highlands and hillsides. The Stoors were broader, heavier in build. Their feet and hands were larger, and they preferred flatlands and riverside. The Foulhides were fairer of skin and also of hair, and they were taller and slimmer than the others. They were lovers of trees and of woodlands. The Harfoots had much to do with dwarves in ancient times, and long lived in the foothills of the mountains. They moved westward early, and roamed over Eriador as far as Weathertop, while the others were still in the Wilderland. They were the most normal and representative variety of hobbit, and far the most numerous. They were the most inclined to settle in one place, and longest preserved their ancestral habit of living in tunnels and holes. The Stores lingered long by the banks of the great river Anduin, and were less shy of men. They came west after the Harfoots, and followed the course of the Loudwater southwards, and there many of them long dwelt between Tharbad and the borders of Dunland before they moved north again. What? The Fellowhides, the least numerous, were a northerly branch. They were more friendly with elves than the other hobbits were, and had more skill in language and song than in handicraft, and of old they preferred hunting to tilling. They crossed the mountains north of Rivendell and came down the river Horwell. In Eriador they soon mingled with the other kinds that had preceded them, but being somewhat bolder and more adventurous, they were often found as leaders or chieftains among clans of Harfoots or Stores. Even in Bilbo's time, the strong Fellowhidish strain could still be noted among the greater families, such as the Tooks and the Masters of Buckland. In the westlands of Eriador, between the Misty Mountains and the Mountains of Loon, the hobbits found both men and elves. Loon or Luna?
Loon.
I'm pausing for a second to address this because we talked about it before we started streaming. Because I've had many questions about why I'm going by AJ and if I've changed my name. Because if you know me in real life, you don't know me by a different name. I have not. This is my nom de web. This is the name I go by online. So, in case you're wondering, if I change my name, I will tell people, and not like coincidentally. I don't know if I will. I'm kind of still in the market. Anyways, that's that about that.
Why, AJ?
Stands for Apple Jacks, because it's my favorite cereal. Where was I?
We were at the Loon.
Loon. Ah, indeed, a remnant still dwelt there of Dunedain, the kings of men that came over the sea, of the Dunedain.
Woo!
Woo-hoo-hoo! Dunedain! Kings of men that came over the sea out of Westerness, but they were dwindling fast, and the lands of their north kingdom were falling far and wide into waste. There was room and to spare for incomers, and ere long the hobbits began to settle in ordered communities. Most of their earlier settlements had long disappeared and been forgotten in Bilbo's time, but one of the first to become important still endured, though reduced in size. This was at Bree, and in the Chetwood that lay round about, some 40 miles east of the Shire. It was in these early days, doubtless, that the hobbits learned their letters and began to write after the manner of the Dunedain, who had in their turn long before learned the art from the elves.
I have more important things to do, but damn it. They're all kind of noisy and large.
How much longer is Concerning Hobbits? I feel like this is way longer than I remember it being.
It's longer than it is in the movies. For the record, we love the movies. We always have. We watched the movies before we read the book together. I think that was the reason we did finally get past the long-expected party and get into the rest of the stories, because we wanted to see how it would compare with Peter Jackson's vision.
100%. Geez, this is like 20 pages of prologue. Did we read this last time, or did we skip it? Should we?
We skipped it. We can skip it. Let's get to the long-expected party.
All right. So hobbits are little.
All right. If you're following, if you're watching, and you want us to come back and finish Concerning Hobbits at some point, let us know.
Yep.
Woo!
A long expected party. All right, I'm gonna read a little bit of this, and then when I get bored, I'm gonna tap out and start doing some sewing, and you can read. Yes?
That's a great idea. You start your cross stitch. I'll start reading. You let me know how my volume is.
I will, and I'm gonna move my camera so that it's focused on not my lap per se, but my work.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Book 1. Chapter 1. A long expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. We should all be so lucky. At 99, they began to call him well preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess apparently perpetual youth as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. It will have to be paid for, they said. That isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But so far trouble had not come, and as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginses, and he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd. You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad, said Bilbo one day, and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together. At that time, Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year, the Bagginses had given very lively wine.
What?
What just happened?
I unmuted my mic. Why?
Because it sounded like...
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I unmuted my mic to say something and now I don't remember what.
Tweens? Coming of age at 33?
The timeline in the books is so much more stretched out than it is in the movie. In the movie, it's like 2 months later. And then the books, it's like, and then 30 years passed.
17. Well, 16. And then it takes Frodo like 8 months to move. Gandalf is like, get the fuck out of here! And Frodo's like, okay! First I have to sell my house, and then I have to pack, and then I have to take long walks around the Shire to remind myself how beautiful it is. Yeah, it's...
Yep.
I will get to that.
I was going to say something topical about, like, Frodo's social isolating response. Everybody should support each other. Okay, but first I have to get groceries, and then I need to get my nails done. And
yeah. Oh, and I've been meaning to get that tattoo.
Exactly. Mute myself again because apparently that goes when I take it off. So, just I might be messing with the camera a bit though, trying to get the spot right.
I'll let you know if it's distracting. It should be fine.
Let's try this.
12 more years passed. Each year, the Bagginses had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn. Bilbo was going to be 11, a rather curious number, and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Took himself had only reached 130. And Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and a rumour of the coming event travelled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. It occurred to me eventually that meant that Sam had siblings, and I looked it up, and he has like a lot of siblings.
Really?
Yeah. Ein Minuten bitte.
Ich habe eine kleine Problema.
Oh, these are timelines. There we go. No, that's Annals of the Kings and Rulers. Where are my... that's the timelines. Brandybuck of Buckland, Baggins of Hobbiton, Duke of Great Smiles, Master Samwise. Okay, so he's got 5 siblings. Hampson and Halfred, Daisy, May, and his little sister Marigold. So there you go. Fountain of information.
There are many more Gamgees than we knew.
There's a ton. Sam and Rosie end up with like 13 children.
Well, the Hobbits, one thing the Hobbits did not invent was the condom, so. I'm trying to figure out how to make this visible because I turn it towards myself when I work on it, and then you can't see it.
Right?
If I was, like, in any way professional, I would have a camera over my shoulder, but I don't.
Right, a remote camera that you could just plug into your laptop.
Yeah, I don't have that. So we're going to do what we can.
All right. Good luck.
Thank you. I'll just be... Might be easier. I might switch to knitting. We'll see.
That at least is visible from both sides. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself, in number 3 Bagshot Row, just below Bag End. And humans watching, I know my accents are for crap, but I'll try anyway because that's how we roll, and you can make fun of me if you like, but not to my face, okay? A very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said, the Gaffer declared, with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables. In the matter of roots, especially potatoes, the Gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. "But what about this Frodo that lives with him?" asked old Noakes of Bywater. "Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandybuck, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Buckland where folks are so queer."
Ooh, I mean, what?
No wonder they're queer, put in Daddy Two-Foot, the Gaffer's next-door neighbor. What's up?
I was just gonna say, this is like a new euphemism for being queer. Is I heard that person's from Buckland, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Oh, he made me a hat. Nice.
Crown thingy.
And no wonder they're queer, put in Daddy Two-Foot, the Gaffer's next-door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, there's another one.
I might even like that one better.
And right again the old forest. That's a dark, bad place, if half the tales be true. "You're right, Dad," said the Gaffer. "Not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest. But they're a queer..." What?
Can I also just say that for someone whose name is Daddy Proudfoot, to say that other people are queer is quite presumptuous.
He's Daddy Two-Foot. Don't get that your foot's confused. Daddy 2 foot.
That's better.
They are a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him. Till he was drowned. Drowned? Said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. Well, so they say, said the gaffer. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Primula Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Took's daughters. And Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So, Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin, once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. Not at all incestuous little village there.
Well, for some reason I heard it as that that Frodo's father had married Frodo's first cousin, and I was like, wait a minute.
No.
European royalty in it? But okay, we're fine.
And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, old Master Gorboduc, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals and old Gorboduc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Mr. Frodo only a child and all. I've heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight, said old Noakes, and it was Drogo's weight as sunk the boat. And I heard she pushed him in and he pulled her in after him, said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. There isn't no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo, left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those queer Bucklanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall.
I have spilled my tea.
No! I'll keep reading, okay?
What?
They spilled their tea. A regular warren, by all accounts. Old Master Gorboduc never had fewer than a couple of 100 relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get Bag End that time when he went off and was thought to be dead. And then he comes back and orders them off, and he goes on living and living, never looking a day older, bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir and has all the papers made out proper. The Sackville Bagginses won't never see the inside of Bag End now, or it is to be hoped not. There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger, a visitor on business from Micheldelving in the West Farthing. All the top of your hill is full of tunnels packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, by all I've heard. Then you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the gaffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back a matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. I'd not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at Bag End helping him to keep folks from trampling and traipsing all over the garden while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say, but there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. Your tea spill okay?
Oh, I spilled the whole cup. Yeah, I kicked it over. But it's okay. I mopped it up. Good choice on my part to drink some red zinger today.
So it's you've marked your territory with markings?
If my landlord ever watches this, no.
It's fine. It's all fine. That spot was there already. Shit. Sorry, darling. Sympathy, sorry. All right.
We're switching to knitting. It's easier to see.
Good plan. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in and out of Bag End. Crazy about stories of the old days, he is, and he listens to all Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Because reading is dangerous.
I teach someone to read. Check your privilege, that's what I say.
Elves and dragons, I says to him. Cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. And I might say it to others, he added, with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits. Ah, but he's likely enough been adding to what he brought at first, argued the miller, voicing common opinion. He's often away from home, and look at the outlandish folk that visit him. Dwarves coming at night, that old wandering conjurer, Gandalf, and all.
You can conjure cheap tricks, man.
Right? Wandering conjurer, because Tolkien is a wordsmith.
Oh boy, are we going to start getting those? We are, aren't we?
Goldberry, Goldberry, Berry, Yellowberry.
Don't even start. We all know Boromir bore a horn in his gear, okay? If you're wondering, these are some tongue twisters that Tolkien has kindly written into these books for us. Thanks a lot, yes. Ronald.
He was very much aware of the sound of words. He didn't just cobble them together. He crafted them. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bag End's a queer place, and its folk are queerer. And you can say what you like about what you know no more of than you do of boating, Mr. Sandyman, retorted the Gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts, amen.
That's what I've always said.
There's some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. But they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that everyone's going to be invited to the party. There's going to be presents, mark you. Presents for all. This very month as is. That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumor, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks, what is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century, not indeed since the old Took died. Days passed, and the day drew nearer. What?
I felt like that implied they had fireworks at his funeral, which, like, all right,
sure.
That's kind of a baller move.
Very What are they in Guardians of the Galaxy? The Raiders, the Reapers, the It's not Reavers.
Not Reavers.
But you know of what I speak. Fireworks funerals.
Yeah. I haven't seen all of Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Oh.
What they're called.
Oh, you should. What stopped you?
A general lack of interest in third generation Marvel movies.
It's one of the good ones.
Good to know.
Days passed and the day drew nearer. An odd-looking wagon laden with odd-looking packages rolled into Hobbiton one evening and toiled up the hill to Bag End. The startled hobbits peered out of lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by outlandish folk, singing strange songs. I love it that everyone in Lord of the Rings, while they're traveling, sing. The elves are walking through the woods and singing. The dwarves are driving through the Shire and singing. They have, like, driving songs. I want them.
I mean, I, for one, sing when I'm driving a lot, so... is that not normal?
But are they outlandish songs? Or strange songs? Yeah. Dwarves with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Bag End. At the end of the second week in September, a cart came in through Bywater from the direction of the Brandywine Bridge in broad daylight. An old man was driving it, all alone. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart all through Hobbiton and right up to the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks, as they rightly guessed. At Bilbo's front door, the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks of all sorts and shapes, each labeled with a large red G, and the elf rune, that also means G. That was Gandalf's mark, of course, and the old man was Gandalf, the wizard, whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but the Shire folk knew nothing about it. To them, he was just one of the attractions of the party. Hence the excitement of the hobbit children. "Gee for grand!" they shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally, and never stopped long. But neither they nor any but the oldest of their elders had seen one of his firework displays. They now belonged to the legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarves, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or cracker was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers. "Run away now," said Gandalf. "You'll get plenty when the time comes." Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit stared at the door in vain for a while, and then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room looking out west onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden. Snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows. He wrote it as nasturtiums, and an editor corrected it to nasturtiums because we think of those orange and yellow vine flowers as nasturtiums. We are incorrect. They are nasturtiums. That is their Latin name. Nasturtium is the name of some other plant. It's the Latin name of, I can't even remember. It's something totally unrelated, like a cabbage. I'll put it in the description if we have a description, yeah? Yeah, okay. So this editor got to have their ass chewed out by Professor Tolkien, who came over and personally brought over an encyclopedia of plants to say, correct me again. I fucking dare you.
Have you heard the story about Tolkien's classes?
No.
So Diana Wynne Jones was a student of Tolkien's at Oxford. She took a writing class from him. And he deliberately made his classes as boring and awful as he possibly could because he wanted all the students to drop so that then he could spend his time writing and he didn't have to teach. But she refused to drop the class. So he would come in and like mumble and write on the board and not face them. And she was just like,
yeah, that's what I would be too. Oh, that's awesome. We're sitting on almost an hour here. Should we cut it to an hour or what?
well, that's a good question.
Ow.
Cut it to an hour, plan to do like an hour reading time and then see how that feels. Does that feel like a good length to you?
It does feel like a good length to me. And we're at as good a stopping place as any within the next few pages.
Alrighty. Well, that sounds like a plan then.
Apparently I've had bunny ears for I don't know how long.
I actually don't know either. I was looking at my knitting. Anyways. So.
Yes.
Cool. First reading session achieved.
Absolutely.
Difficulties.
Are we going to come back tomorrow then? Love it. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you with some long conversations between Bilbo and Gandalf.
Almost as long as the conversations between you
and me. And we might even make it to the party, and the party rocks. So
I hear that Party Rock is in the house tonight, in fact.
Everybody's gonna have a really good time.
You're gonna make me lose my mind.